The Phoenix Suns had no issue handling Dallas here in the Valley in game one, but it didn't even feel like the Suns' best effort. How were they still able to win, and what is the rest of this series going to look like? We'll get to it all on today's Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member and a contributor at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day. We had a two-part series preview over the weekend, Sunday, Monday, and now back to recap game one. So hit that subscribe or that follow button wherever you are listening or watching. We are not going anywhere. Should be a blast. 3-game win streak here as part of this win. 121-114. The Suns take game one over the Dallas Mavericks. I'll have all of my thoughts here on the recap. We're going to get into how the Suns were able to win despite it not even feeling like their absolute best. We're going to talk about what about Dallas just did not come together that was working for them after they beat the Jazz. And then we'll talk about Deandre Ayton and why he was able to be so impactful. What are some of the X's and O's reasons and why I think it'll continue. What we're not going to get into too much is the end of the game because, yes, the Mavericks outscored the Suns 35-25. There were some breakdowns defensively. There were some missed shots. Got a little wonky. The Suns barely ended up covering for any of you who had some money on the game, but I don't put too much stock into that. It didn't feel like the players or Monty did all that much. Either a win is a win, especially in the playoffs. And I'm also going to wait until tomorrow to talk too much about Luka Doncic because I'm sort of the opinion right now with Luka that he just scored 45 and the Mavs really didn't ever get close to winning this game. So, I mean, does he have 55 in him? Maybe we're talking then, but I don't feel like there's a ton to say, but I do want to continue to obviously monitor him. He's the best player in the entire series, and I think he can do more. I just don't think that was really the difference in this game. So we won't hit too much of Luka, but once again, I called it a B-plus level from the Suns, and I don't think that's unfair. I don't think that that's just me, riling up Mavs fans or anything like that. If there's any of you watching or listening, it's true. This Suns team, I mean, in game 3 of the first round, we saw what like a C-plus can look like, okay? So I'm also not saying that as like a cocky Suns guy out here just saying like, oh, this was nothing. I mean, we've seen it be worse, but we've also seen it be much better. And I think we can say this was not their best. Jay Crowder, hit shots. That wasn't always happening in round one. You had 27 assists, 28 threes attempted. 30 is that magic number in both of those categories. So they were approaching that, single digit turnovers. There were some signs, I think, that the Suns are hitting their gear, but this didn't feel like their best. So a couple reasons why I don't think it was their best, and then we'll get into why they were still able to win. Devin Booker was only 7 of 20 from the field. Yeah, he had 8 assists and only 1 turnover, so he was impactful. A big reason they won, especially his first quarter. I think he had 13 points of his 23 in the first quarter, as well as 6 of his rebounds and I believe 3 or 4 of his assists. So literally the majority of his damage came in the first quarter, but he didn't close all that well. You did not have, very, very like game 7 types of coaching adjustments. You didn't have game 7 minutes levels from the Suns either. And I think, to be honest, their defense, it locked down in spurts, especially in that third quarter. But it was far from perfect. They let Maxi Kleber score a ton. So my point is, this was a good game from the Suns. It was not a great game, and they still won. And here are a few reasons why they did that. they're just better. I mean, they just won in every category is what it comes down to. We'll get into some of the specifics in terms of what the Jazz or the Mavs didn't do that they were doing against Utah and the big man battle and some of that stuff. But there's just not an area of the game that the Mavs won at the end of the day. I mean, Suns out-rebounded them by 15. That advantage is back in the Suns' favor, at least for one series. It's not going to be a rebounding scare like the last series was. Assists lower, and that's really the biggest part of this. The other categories, I've listed some of them already. The Mavs shot worse. They made more, actually. Three-point shooting was one area where they were a little better, but free throw shooting about the same. Turnovers about the same, et cetera, et cetera. Pace, I thought the Suns played at a much better pace than the Mavs did. They were able to turn defense into offense more consistently than the Mavs were, run off of missed shots more than the Mavs were. So everything was either equal or slightly in the Suns' favor outside of that three-point shooting. But the assists, I think, is probably the most indicative of what happened tonight. And it does come back to Luka a little bit. And it also comes back to another guy who I want to talk about in segment 2. But right from the jump, it just felt like, oh, wow, a realization that the Mavs' defaults were going to need to be tinkered with, because you were just seeing the Suns came out rocking. Booker, like I already said, was making shots to open. I think all three of Jay Crowder's made threes, I believe, were in the first quarter. And then you also had, Chris Paul had a nice stretch in the first half, but they were doing their thing, moving the ball, getting up and down, clamping down on defense. And then you'd get these Mavericks possessions where Dallas just sort of rolls the ball out in the half-court offense, and they ended up scoring 114. But early, it was just isolations. And it wasn't isolations that were turning into layups or dunks or threes, really good high-percentage shots. It was isolations that were turning into floaters or mid-range jumpers or turnovers from both Brunson and Doncic. And that's never going to, it's not going to work as a playoff offense ever, really. I guess you could say it did for the Bucks in the finals last year, but that's a different story. The supporting cast around Giannis is much better than this Mavs roster is. And it didn't work for Luka. It didn't work for the Mavs. And that's why they were down 10. They were down, I think, as many as 16 in the first quarter. You can't trade isolation twos for in-rhythm threes, in-rhythm layups, fast break points, all that type of stuff. And that's what allowed the Suns to get out to an early lead. And it just didn't really relent after that. The Mavs just didn't seem to get into a rhythm that suited them. I just can't help but feel like they were coming off of a series where things were really easy. At the end of the day, the Jazz were imploding. Their defense, if you read about what was going on, if you watched the games, if you saw any of the clips going around online or in highlight videos or on TV in the broadcast that they were replaying over and over, the Jazz had nothing defensively. And it feels like Dallas, that matchup may have been better for them than we even realized. They were the favorite, they were the higher seed, but the simple drive and kick threes, Luka plus threes sort of rhythm that they were getting to offensively, and of course some lobs and all that. Luka's a tremendous pick and roll ball handler, but that was something that was pretty easy to just do against the Jazz, and it's not going to be that easy against the Suns. And so what that allowed them to do is basically dominate in every category. They started up double digits, the Suns did, because of that offensive sort of slowpokeness. And then the Suns just never let up. So let's get into more of what was different about this Mavs team, how the Suns were able to take advantage of it, and why the momentum has shifted so far toward the Suns in just one game. First, though, guys, today's show brought to you by PrizePicks. Daily fantasy made easy, first and foremost, but also daily fantasy made fun and made simple. We love it here at the Locked On Podcast Network because, look, regular NBA fantasy, I'm not a big fan of. It's a little bit too difficult to keep up with how many games there are, and I don't always love making it. I talk about the NBA so much. I like talking about it with friends, but it feels like work to do it when you have a league that you're having to maintain. PrizePicks is easy to use, and it's simple. 2 to 5 players in an over or under on their projections. You can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projections. Again, no league, no rotisserie, no draft, no pool even. It's not a pool. It's just you versus those projections. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and PrizePicks offers safe and fast withdrawals. So what you do is you pick a player, and then you pick an over and under on one prop or another, one statistical category or another. So let's say, even though the Mavs might continue to lose, you're probably going to hit the over on points on Luka every game, right? You're going to go over on that, and then maybe you're also going to go over on Deandre Ayton points. Seems like a pretty good lineup. That's your 2 guys. That could be your lineup for the day. And PrizePicks doesn't just offer NBA. They have options on the college basketball, college football, NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and more. For a limited time, PrizePicks also has an exclusive no-brainer offer for all Locked On listeners. Users will get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point when you use the code NBA. That's right, an exclusive offer available only to Locked On listeners who sign up today and use the code NBA for $50 free if and when a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. PrizePicks Daily Fantasy made easy. So the Mavs come into round 2 with their heads held high, understandably. They win 2 out of 3 without Luka. Then he comes back in game 4, and they win 2 out of 3 to close it out. And it's a 6-game win over a Jazz team that last year was the number 1 seed that has a fair bit of talent. But the Mavs were able to really just make short work of them because the Jazz defense had nothing. And that team doesn't seem to like playing together. And all the reasons we know the Jazz fell apart. I'm coming away from this game, and first of all, I do feel like this. I just got done saying the Suns were not at their absolute A++ level. They might have been a titch below that. I think the Mavs were close to it. They shot 41% from 3. Their defense wasn't up to snuff, at least to the level that it had been in the regular season, but I just don't know if that's going to be possible in this series. Unless something dramatically changes, I don't feel like they have answers to a lot of what the Suns did. So this feels like it might have been the Mavs' best. Knowing how easy they had it against the Jazz and how that matchup suited them so well, and seeing now game 1, how a lot of that went away, it has the vibe to a degree of last year's Denver series. And it's not just the incomplete team. Like, that part is a little bit similar. The Mavs have had the big KP trade. They've had injuries with Hardaway and different things that have changed their roster. And that feels somewhat similar to the Nuggets. The Doncic-Jokic thing, in terms of one guy doing so much, feels very similar. But I think at the end of the day, what I keep coming back to is, again, that all-encompassing. What is something that the Mavs do better than the Suns? I mean, that's a very basic way to look at it, but that was eye-opening today. They're not going to out-rebound the Suns. Maybe they outshoot them. Totally within the realm of possibility. They're probably not going to get to the free throw line all that many times. They don't have a lot of guys besides Doncic who does that. And they're not, unless they really become an insanely solid defensive team now, they're not the type of team that's going to just clamp you down and hold you to 95. They'll hold up. They'll probably have a better defensive night a couple times in this series than they did today. But I just go through it and I come away feeling like those similarities are there. Was there a little bit of fluff in what the Mavs were able to do to the Jazz? Maybe. And is it just difficult at the end of the day with a one-man show type of team to do what you need to do? I'm not saying the series is over, but I think those similarities are there. And you look, and it was very evident from game 1 in last year's second round too. That was another game where the Suns at home led by double digits most of the way. And that was that. The obvious elephant in the room, however, when you're talking about those comparisons, when you're like me, sort of imagining if this could be a quick series or not, The one obvious place you have to go is Jalen Brunson, because Brunson he was not just good in that first round series. He was amazing. I mean, he was excellent. He was a bona fide number one option in a playoff series, in a 4-5 series. He tonight had 13 points. He had fewer points than shot attempts. He got to the free throw line only once. He only took 1 3. So he was 6 of 16 from the field, and then only 3 assists as well in his 31 minutes. Simply put, I mean, Luka could give you the 55 that I said a second ago. And if Brunson is a shell of himself, a shell of the version of himself we saw in round one, it's not going to be a close series. I mean, they just don't have enough. Spencer Dinwiddie has not been as good in the playoffs as he was toward the end of the regular season. He's really on this team mostly just, I mean, his role is almost similar to like what Mikal Bridges does for the Suns. It's take a bunch of threes and attack a closeout here and there, maybe run a few pick and rolls, but he's not really doing much on this team. They don't have offense to fill in for if Brunson doesn't have it. And we know how those things can trickle down. If you are missing a bunch of shots, or if you are turning the ball over, or if you are not getting to the free throw line, those things also affect your defense because you're having to defend in transition more. You're having to defend off of long misses more when the threes bounce all the way, out to half court like some of those rebounds will do. If you're a great offense, your defense is going to benefit. And that is the cycle that the Mavs were able to get into in the first round, where they just controlled everything. That said, I do think that there are some things that we did see in the front court duel that will carry over on both sides. Actually, we're positives on both sides. So we'll get into the Deandre Ayton versus the Dallas Centers matchup here in just a second. First, though, guys, today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports news, analysis, info, even podcasts all year long. Find the latest sports developments, including up-to-date news and all of that on this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the MLB season. Again, BetOnline, your continued source for all the info you need to make the smartest bets possible, including live betting and esports. All right, have a bet for you. I'm looking at the Game 2 odds. They made it quite tense for us in Game 1 here because the Suns barely covered. Spencer Dinwiddie's corner three at the end of the regulation goes in. It's actually a very different ballgame here. Game 2, I was looking at Bucks Celtics. So the Celtics are favored by 4.5 on BetOnline right now, even though Milwaukee won Game 1. I know that Celtics are still at home, but that series seems like it might be a lot closer than we thought. Plus 4.5 for Milwaukee. Check that stuff every single day, guys. Head to the website. That's betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the latest trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Deandre Ayton was the obvious other star of the show outside of the Suns sort of team game. Devin Booker early. Chris Paul also had a few moments where he just decided to take over, as he tends to do. But Deandre Ayton was consistent throughout. Yes, maybe there's the argument, could he have gotten the ball more in the second half, et cetera, et cetera. We know all of that stuff. And it's not the time to have that conversation because the Suns won and they're on a 3-game winning streak and they are one of the top favorites to win the championship. So you take it and you take the good with the bad. It was overwhelmingly good today. We knew from the jump DeAndre Ayton was going to need to have an incredible series. I mean, he was going to need to be consistently solid as a scorer, being aggressive, taking advantage, and the team was going to need to find him and all that stuff. And he was, with how much pick and roll Dallas figured to play, going to have to play a pretty significant role on defense too. So that was the expectation level, and he surpassed it. I mean, he at least met it, if not surpassed it. Ayton scored 25 points, 12 of 20 from the field, 8 rebounds. I believe all those rebounds were in the second half. Very bizarre sort of box score curio, I guess, at halftime. I tweeted it out. Some people took it as an insult. I said DeAndre Ayton has 0 rebounds and the Suns are still out-rebounding the Mavs by double digits. Very different than it was in round one, which is true. Ayton had to crash the glass and had to devote a ton of mental and physical energy to doing that in the first round, because that was the only way the Suns were going to be able to handle Valanciunas and Nance and everybody else. It's not an insult to say that they were handling the boards without Ayton having to do that. That's a good thing. If you can win the rebounding battle and your center doesn't even have to actually grab any of them, that's a good thing. So he was good. I mean, he was boxing out. He was doing his thing. I'm not criticizing him for that. And then, of course, he was identifying and attacking those mismatches every chance that he got. A few things there. So the who is very important here. Obviously, he has a mismatch when somebody gets switched onto him. Saw that a couple times with Brunson or Doncic or whomever it might have been. Right? That's the easy one. If Chris Paul sees a literal guard on DeAndre Ayton, the obvious thing to do is get him the ball and he's going to score. Things got a little bit more interesting when it was the actual big men, though. So Dwight Powell, one of the biggest things I think we learned tonight is that he's not going to do much defensively against Ayton, all things considered, because maybe there were some times when Ayton was a little bit more hesitant to back Powell down, try to put the ball on the ground when he was matched up on Powell. Maybe he, relied and went to the mid-range or the turnaround rather than a drive or a hook shot. But other than that, Powell did not pose much of a problem. And even if Ayton is choosing different shots because it's Powell, a lot of the time they were still going in, because the thing, even though we think of Dwight Powell as like, oh, he's the traditional center, and then Maxi Kleber or Dorian Finney-Smith, those are the small ball guys. Okay, yes, in theory, because Powell is a rim runner, he's an athlete, he sort of fills that screen and roll type of mold for the most part in Dallas. He's small for a center. I mean, he's like 6'9" or 6'10", and DeAndre Ayton is 6'11" or 7 feet, and that's a big difference. Powell's also a thinner dude. He's not like the, most functionally strong guy. He's not pushing people around. So there were just moments where it was like, oh, wow. Even if Powell is the guy, if Ayton gets good positioning and is in rhythm, he's still going to be able to score on Powell. There's nobody on this Mavs roster, unless Marjanovic is going to be coming out here and Boban will play. Unless that happens, there's not a player on this roster that Ayton can't handle. That said, Maxi Kleber did pose he was the only guy outside of Luka who should scare the Suns much at all. And he made, I believe, 5 of his first 6 threes. He may have made his first 4 to start. It was pretty simple stuff. It was Kleber mostly in the corner and then Luka driving and kicking out to him. And that was it. That was as simple as it really needed to be. And we saw that in the first round. The Mavs were getting easy shots on hardly any sets at all against the Jazz. And when they are collapsing the defense and their shooters are making shots, that can work. But there's only so much of that really is going to work if the closeout comes and nobody's able to do anything. So yeah, Kleber's not going to be the guy to attack a closeout, put the ball on the ground, and come get a dunk off of a drive. That's not what he is, but he made enough shots to help the Mavs stay in the game in the first half. And that's going to be the interesting thing. We're already seeing Kleber get more minutes than he did in round one. Powell get fewer minutes than he did in round one. And Kleber already out playing in terms of minutes Powell completely by 10 already. I think that's just going to continue to go. I think eventually Kleber maybe gets the starting nod and you just go from there, because he pulls the Suns defense apart with his shooting. And he's also a guy, he's probably the only player on this entire Mavs roster outside of potentially Dorian Finney-Smith who can guard Chris Paul and guard DeAndre Ayton. So that's the direction I expect the series to go, but Powell has to play. This Mavs team is not deep. They don't have a lot of depth. We saw Frank Ntilikina get minutes. We saw we saw Josh Green get minutes. they don't have a lot of options, and Davis Bertans as well. So Powell's going to play. Kleba might play more. Powell might play less. That could be how we get there, but they're all going to have to play, and Ayton has scored on all of them. Even if Kleba is maybe the biggest test and he's the best option, I don't know if that really changes the series. But that is a conversation for a different day, guys. That has been your Game 1 recap. The Suns take Game 1. Very, very great way to start after the frustration of round 1. It was nice to just hit the ground running, of course, for the Suns, I'm sure. Nice for all of us to see a win, and we'll see what happens in Game 2. Tomorrow, you can expect a Game 2 preview. We'll talk a little bit more about Luka. We'll talk a little bit more about what to make of that fourth quarter that the Suns struggled with in Game 1. But for now, I just wanted to hit the positives. Just a all-positive show. So hit subscribe, hit follow wherever you're listening or watching. Come right back here tomorrow, and we'll keep going. Thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on Monday night, Tuesday morning, guys. Now, go make Locked On NBA your second listen to get caught up on everything that went on around the league on Monday night.